Continuing on, our next speaker was taught to value the environment in the same way that she was taught to value people, communities and collectives from a school education in Māori immersion environments in Kohanga Reo and Kura Papa Māori that's carried her through her entire career. She's currently the head of sustainability at Contact Energy, as well as recently running in the 2020 elections, all that as a young solo mother to her two beautiful children. She carries the passion and pride across all aspects of her life. I welcome to the stage excuse me, my apologies. Kaapua Smith, my apologies.
Kia ora tātou, tēnā koutou katoa, ngā mihi nui ki te tangata whenua, ngai tahu, ara te whānau wai hopai. Thank you for that lovely introduction. I'll introduce a little bit more, I'll talk a little bit more about myself shortly as I go through the presentation, but thank you for having me here. It's lovely to be in a room full of women and to be talking about things that we're passionate about, which is the environment and our communities and how you make a change and a difference for our future generations. So thank you for having me. Now, today when I was sitting in my motel room over across the road at the Ibis, I had a work meeting. And I'm actually going to flash forward to my last slide and then come all the way back.
You're in charge.
Where do I point it? You might need to be my pointer. Is that working? Oh, here. Sorry.
Now they're all going. Good. There you go.
And I'll tell you why I'm excited. Oh, hang on. There, I passed it. This is Contact's strategy. Not its sustainability strategy, but its actual business core strategy. So today at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I was sitting in the motel room as our CEO and our CFO presented the strategy to the business. You'll see the word decarbonisation all the way through that. That's about tackling climate change. You'll see the words the environment, social and governance up on that slide. That's all about making a difference to our environmental and social impacts as a business. Today I listened to our business talk about how important and how embedded sustainability is in our core business strategy. And it made me so proud. And it reminded me of 6 years ago when I started at Contact Energy, when we had a sustainability team of 1, and everyone looked at us as if we were the crazy people. They looked at us and they thought our sole job was to deal with the rubbish. And then I look at this, and I think about the talk I had today, and who was presenting that talk, and I feel really good about where we've got to. It's taken a long time, it's taken a lot of people, and it's taken some interesting skills to get us here. But tonight, that's what I want to talk to you about. I want to talk to you about our journey of embedding sustainability in a big corporate company. I'm not going to sugarcoat things. We're impactful on the environment. We're impactful on our communities. It is a hard job, and there's lots to do. And so just to be honest about that up front, it's a big job. So this is the last slide because it's the end point, but now it's become my first slide, so now I'm going all the way back. So I said earlier I'd introduce myself, but you actually gave a very good introduction. My name is Kaapua Smith, no Ngāti Pro, Ngāti Awa me Ngāti Apa, no Ngaitahu Kati Mamoi Hoki. I come from tribes all over New Zealand, and I didn't know how to speak English until I was about 9, because my parents were Māori activists. And they decided this becomes important, because if I start sounding like an activist trying to enroll you in the resistance, I can't help it, it was my parents' love language. But part of their activism was starting the movement of kura kaupapa Māori. So I consider myself to be a bit of an experiment. They threw me in there. My dad was my first teacher. My mum was the sole income earner as he taught this experimental class of myself and their friends' kids. I went to English school at about 9 years old, where we went and did English for an hour a day. And when I was 11 and went to high school, because we didn't have normal age groups, we had little kids, middle kids and big kids. I went to high school at 11. I couldn't spell and I got severely teased. And I remember thinking, well, bugger that, I'm going to be the best English speaker here. And so I did. I developed my English language skills. And why is that important? I guess it's because, and this is why I love this photo. This photo is me on the lawnmower. The one day a year I go and mow the lawns at my marae. One day a year. Because my actual skill is speaking. My actual skill is influencing. My actual skill is politics. And I so admire the people on the front line doing the hard work. And I now lead a sustainability team of 20 people at Contact. We have people who plant trees, we have people who look after the land, we have people doing sustainability reporting, we have people doing sponsorship and community engagement, and I'm in the back. And I hate being in the back, I'd rather be in the front. But that is where my skill base is. So I guess the message from me, one of the key learnings is, everyone has a place in the resistance. There are multiple sites of struggle. And collectively, our skills can all make a difference. And I guess over time, because I always felt a bit shy and embarrassed that I'm not the frontline person, but over time I've learnt that I have an important role to play. And that role is unlocking the resource, the support, the strategy, and the capability to be able to deliver across a range of sites for Contact Energy. So who is Contact? Hands up if you know who Contact Energy is. Yep. So we're the second largest generator and retailer in New Zealand. We have 11 power stations all over the country, and many of you will know our South Island operations on the Clutha River, so the Clyde and the Roxburgh Dam, Lake Hawea control gates. We also have 5 geothermal power stations in Taupō. We have a gas-fired power station, and we have a diesel-fired power station in the Hawke's Bay. We have call centres across the country. We have 63,000 investors, 1,000 staff. We produce 932,000 emissions, or CO2e emissions every year. That's who Contact Energy is. We also, as a result, rely heavily on New Zealand's natural resources to generate electricity. So that comment I said earlier about being an impactful company, we're very mindful of that. And so when you're delivering sustainability programs within a company of that size, you've got to be very mindful that you don't drink the Kool-Aid, that you don't sing your praises when you know it's a longer journey and it's a bigger story than what you're able to do in sort of one sustainability program alone, which is why it's important to embed these things in your strategy. So I'm going to talk about corporate sustainability and what it is, how it is, where we started. And I guess I said a little bit at the start about starting, and people thought the sustainability person was all about waste. And waste is a really important part of sustainability, it really is. But actually, the start of our journey of embedding it at a massive scale was about really focusing on the big impacts that we had as a business. The big impact we have is not generally on rubbish. Yes, we generate rubbish in our offices. The big impact Contact has is on our waterways. It's on the emissions that we produce, which lead to climate change. It's on the impacts on biodiversity as a result of putting dams in rivers, of extracting geothermal steam from ecosystems that rely on heat and hot ground. These are our big environmental impacts. We also impact on communities who rely on these resources that we have the privilege of using. We impact on our customers who rely on electricity for their well-being, many of whom struggle to access basic energy needs to service their homes. So when we went about setting up our sustainability program, the first thing we asked ourselves was, what are our impacts? Where is our opportunity to create change? And I just listed off a whole lot of stuff there. That's a lot of stuff. You would know, just working on one catchment, how much work goes into restoring these things. So there's a lot of work that goes into addressing each of these impacts over time. The other thing we did was we actually looked at ourselves and said, what do we stand for as a business? This is our purpose statement. Contact wants to put its energy where it matters. And where it matters is where our communities tell us our big impacts are, that we can make a difference on, where they, on the things which they value. So I guess for Contact, embedding sustainability started with understanding our purpose, connecting to our purpose, and recognising the impacts that we have as a business. Sustainability to us also meant understanding why we were doing it. So beyond the purpose statement of the big why, what were the actual drivers of influence or change that our stakeholders cared about? And which stakeholders did you influence to actually get and unlock the resources and the focus you need to deliver sustainability within an organisation? And for me and for Contact, I started with our investors. So we have 63,000 of those, right? 63,000. I call investors the voters of the private sector, because your investors tell you where they want you to focus your efforts as a business. So we focused our first part of our sustainability program on boring things like reporting, because reporting drives transparency. And once the data's out there, it's really hard to deny that you are having an impact on something. So we spent the first part of our years setting up our sustainability program, focusing on things like measuring our emissions, measuring our water use, and actually encouraging the business to be transparent and telling people what our impacts were. And I know it sounds really boring, and it really is. It really is. It's not the fun side of the job. But what that did was created shock, it created embarrassment, and it created an imperative for change. Because people saw that stuff and went, well, actually, that's not good enough. We need to do better. And our stakeholders, our investors, they're not our sole stakeholder base, but our investors saw it and said, well, actually, Contact, if you're not monitoring your environmental impacts or your social impacts, and you're not doing things to make it better, then we're going to move our money elsewhere. You know, and that's a big imperative for change. That's just one. That's just one example of how we tackled the influencing factor around sustainability. But for Contact, it was a big part of the journey. And actually, for a business our size, I guess you guys would think that we had this stuff all under control, right? 6 years ago, we didn't. It's been a slow process of building our systems internally to drive this level of focus, which now goes right from the board all the way down to the shop floor. And when I say the board, I mean I report every board, committee, health and safety meeting. I report to them on our environmental and social performance, and they drive it, so I don't have to. And that goes across the whole business. Well, I think I spoke to this slide just there, but it's about how we started was doing the reporting. We always had our people on the ground at our power stations doing good things. And I guess one of the things I want to differentiate about sustainability and how Contact views it is we view meeting our resource consents as the floor, and we view sustainability as driving to way above that. So everything we do for our mitigation agreements, our consent requirements, we consider that the basic level of what we should be doing. But the focus of our sustainability program, apart from driving transparency and driving cultural change within the organisation, is actually delivering value as far as we possibly can across all of those issues I talked about at the start of the speech: climate change, water, biodiversity and more. And I'm going to take you through different aspects of the kinds of things that we do in order to drive that. But generally speaking, we now have a sustainability management system which goes all the way up from reporting to the board to measuring outcomes to driving change, delivering projects on the ground and connecting to our communities and stakeholders so that we can ensure that what we're doing is in line with what stakeholders want of us, not what our resource consents expect of us. So for the next few slides, I'm just going to talk through some of the sustainability issues that we really focus on in terms of our sustainability program. This one is kind of core to our business, energy sustainability. Now what does that actually mean? Well, we view it as an interplay between these three things. Reliability of energy supply, so that's making sure the lights don't go out. Access to energy, or affordability, cost, that's what that bubble means. And the third one is environmental sustainability, so how environmentally friendly is the generation or the electricity that we are producing. And why we put this together, we call this a trilemma, because if you move one of the bubbles, it affects the other two bubbles. So if you build new renewable power stations and you don't have enough gas or storable electricity like coal or diesel in the system, that has the potential to hugely affect power prices, which also is an adverse outcome from New Zealand. So the job of Contact and other electricity generators in terms of energy sustainability is actually driving that environmental bubble as far as we can to be more renewable, while balancing the cost of electricity to make sure it's affordable for families and ensuring the lights stay on to power our economy and our well-being. So that's what we're doing, and that's what everyone's trying to solve. All the energy companies, they're all doing the same thing. And in fact, I've spoken on a couple of panels with other electricity companies who basically say the same thing in our spiel. So I won't focus too much on this other than to say Contact is currently 83% renewable. A large part of that comes from our hydro operations in the South Island, and we are working towards reducing that significantly, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a future slide, but this is one of the core parts of our sustainability drive, energy sustainability. The other big issue is climate change. This is massive for us because we have such a huge opportunity to create value for New Zealand. Over here I have a graph of the big stack shows where New Zealand's total emissions come from. Emissions, of course, are the contributing factor to climate change, human-driven climate change. 40% comes from energy emissions. 40% of the emissions in New Zealand causing climate change come from energy emissions. If you break that down, which is the grey stack to the right, 5% comes from electricity generation, 18% comes from transport, so that's the energy that powers our cars, 11% comes from manufacturing, and 6% from other sources. There'll be things like schools and hospitals and things like that. So in addressing the climate challenge, decarbonisation is king. And that slide I flashed up earlier, first slide, our strategy, is all about decarbonisation. So we can address our emissions, which we're going to, the 5%, but we also know that we have influence to address emissions in other areas. We can help tackle the transport emissions through things like EVs and electrification. We can help transform the manufacturing emissions through things like the services and products and support we provide to our customers. And we call them C&I customers, large commercial and industrial users. That's where the focus of our strategy there is. So we've embedded the tackle to address climate change as a core part of our strategy. And we have some runs on the board, although we don't like talking about them, which I've put up here. So we've already reduced our emissions by 62% since 2012 by closing thermal power stations. And we've just set a new target to reduce them by another 45% on a 2018 base year. And that's in line with what science says is required to get us below that 1.5 degree Celsius limit of global warming. It seems there's a lot of pressure on companies like Contact to go 100% renewable or to reduce emissions beyond that. And if we did, we affect that. That's our challenge. And so as a business, we're trying to tackle the climate change problem while managing the energy sustainability problem. And science-based targets, which is what we've used to develop our climate change targets moving forward, help us to deliver something in line with what the global aspirations are, while still enabling us to deliver on our core business. So that's how we've viewed the climate challenge at Contact. And we're doing a lot of stuff to help us deliver on this. So one is we're building new renewable power stations. We've got one happening in Tauhara at the moment that will eventually displace our gas power stations. We've purchased a company called Simply Energy, and their job is to look at innovative solutions for customers that help get them off fossil fuel energy sources. We're looking at things like hydrogen, new electricity sources. So hydrogen-based energy, can be generated from fresh water. So we're just involved in a study at the moment that's in a research phase, but we are looking at the different ways that we can tackle this problem at a big scale. And I guess I keep going back to the same point. That whole thing about having sustainability in your strategy means it's not just my job anymore as a sustainability professional. The whole company has taken on the challenge of trying to address these large sustainability issues. And that's a really positive thing. Another material issue we have is community well-being. All the bubbles on this map show the communities that we're in at Contact. And our focus is on keeping things very local. We aim to be the neighbour you'd want. And I guess in terms of sustainability, the other key point I'd say is it's not always what you do, it's how you do it. I mean, what you do is really important as well, but it's also about the attitude and the relationships you build and how you go about engaging with the people that you care about as a business and that care about you and your success. So in the community space, we do a lot of local site support. We did quite a lot of support for our communities during COVID. We gave away 850k worth of electricity to some of the big community organisations supporting New Zealanders through the COVID challenge. We have an employee volunteer program that's equal to 12,000 hours, which our people can take up and use to support community initiatives that they care about within their communities. And we really have embedded this whole thing about front-footing relationships with communities, and that includes tangata whenua. So we recognise that having positive relationships with people actually makes life a bit easier. And so we invest in that, and that's had a really positive effect on our culture as a business, on the well-being of our staff, and on our long-term social licence to operate. So I guess sustainability at Contact means not just looking after the environment, but looking after the people within our communities that rely on that same natural resource to survive. And we don't have any big national sponsorship programs. We do keep it very local. We hardly talk about what we do. And I think that's sort of reflective of the personality of our business, which is just keep your head down and just do the good things and shh. The other big thing is water. I mean, you guys will know we have the big dams in central Otago. Geothermal electricity generation is also very impactful on rivers. So the Waikato River, for example, geothermal fluid, which although is naturally occurring, does not necessarily naturally go into the river, although our operations do have that impact. We use water for cooling across all our power stations. We use water in our offices. And our dams have an impact on fish passage. And of course, they also have an impact on ecosystems that rely on those natural water bodies. Water is a hard one for us to solve. It is. There are impacts that we have that we can't actually fully address at this time. So we look at what we can do. And what we can do often comes from big changes to plant, which is it's not time consuming, but it takes a long time to put those changes through, and it requires a bit of innovation and forward thinking. So we have done some good things in the past, particularly around our geothermal operations. So for example, like I said, we discharge separated geothermal fluid into the Waikato River. We have built a bioreactor which treats the hydrogen sulfide which comes out of that fluid so that it's not present when it goes back into it. So naturally, it's a natural system in that it's a naturally occurring bacteria that eats the hydrogen sulfide. So it's a world-winning sort of sustainability plant, which was also made by our locals on site, which we're very proud of. But ultimately, the key goal is to just not discharge to river. And that's the goal that we've set for ourselves now as we're looking to redesigning what our geothermal plant looks like at the Wairakei Power Station in Taupō. So sometimes in the sustainability space, the wins aren't quick, they take a long time, but it doesn't mean that you're not working away on them in the background. So that is actually a huge win for us, to be able to say that we are looking at redesigning a whole power station to better serve the awa, to better serve the river. And one day that still won't be enough, because stakeholder expectations will continue to rise and the health and well-being of our rivers will continue to require us to do more. And we know that, but we do things in stages, and that's the one we've got at the moment. Biodiversity. We do a heap in the biodiversity space, and I'm really proud of it. And I often sit there and go, why is it so much easier to solve the biodiversity stuff and not the water stuff? And it's because we can do little things that mount up to quite a big difference. We've planted a lot of trees, we do a lot of pest control, we've done a lot of habitat restoration. We understand the different biodiversity impacts across our different sites. So the impacts we have on hydro, for example, they're different to the impacts that we have at geothermal. At hydro, we have massive impacts on fish passage. At geothermal, it's the cooling of the hot ground which sustains thermotolerant vegetation, or vegetation that thrives in hot spaces. So the solutions we provide across each of our sites is very different. But what I'm really proud of in our team and also the communities that we work in is that there are so many passionate people about the biodiversity space that we managed to pull in quite a few collaborations to help deliver outcomes here. And this is a space where we're looking to set more ambitious targets. Like, we don't want to just plant 1,000 trees in 4 years, we want to elevate that. Our board has asked us for habitat restoration targets, so that's the next thing on the board. How many habitats are we restoring? What counts as restoration? And how do we deliver it and fund it? Those are the types of questions that they're talking about at the board level and that our team on the ground at sites are delivering in partnership with our communities. And we also do a lot of sponsorship in this space. So sponsoring Kiwi programs across different sites. And Kids Greening Taupō, which is, for a small thing, one of my favourite sponsorships, because it's about fostering that next generation of environmental champions. So these have all been really cool projects, and for some reason, focusing our people in the biodiversity space has just been so successful across our sites, and that's a really key learning for me. There's something in this issue which just brings people together. So before I go and talk about what I've learned, there's another thing I want to talk about which I don't have a slide for. And that connects to that bit I was talking about around our strategy, which is because sustainability is now a core part of the strategy, we've got a whole lot of other people in the business going, well, what more can we do? It's no longer our job to deliver sustainability, even though we are the sustainability team. So I have our CFO who set targets for Contact that 100% of our loans, bilateral bank loans, will be sustainability linked loans. So that means they're loans whose interest rates are linked to us delivering on improved sustainability targets. When we meet those targets, the interest rates on those loans drop. So at the moment, 2 out of 7 of our big loans are sustainability linked loans, and we're working with the finance team to turn those other 5 loans into sustainability linked loans. And I know we're just talking about money, but actually money is really important to companies, and it's driving a lot of change, because now my CFO wants us to do more environmental work. Now our CEO wants us to deliver more in terms of gender diversity. energy hardship. Health and safety's always been up there, but like the rest now are coming up because actually there's a financial incentive to delivering on these outcomes. So I guess leading into the what did you learn, what I've learned is that there are a lot of tools that help influence change. That not everyone speaks the same influencing language. That there are many different ways that you as a business, whether we're a big company like Contact or a small company, can bring people on board to the challenge and spread that sustainability focus out across your team. So the other learning, and it goes back to what I said around sustainability is not just our job anymore, it belongs to the whole company, is who are you even anymore if it's not your job? What value do you bring to the table? And it is a real question that I've had to ask myself, that our team has asked ourselves. And our job is to really push us to go further. Our job is to look out there, is to listen to our stakeholders, to our communities, and identify where they want us to go next. Because our stakeholders and their interests and their desires and their expectations are not static. They go up every single year. And so the key job of our team is to make sure that we're in line with it, that our systems work, and that we're delivering at a governance level, at the shop floor level as well, and that we're constantly moving forward. And the other thing we do is we support the embedding of the culture within Contact, which encourages people to ask questions and do more. Not just go, we met the resource consent, that's all we have to do. But to go, we met the resource consent, cool, what else could we do now? And that's a cultural thing within an organisation. So that's been another key learning for us at Contact. I could go on and on and on and on about my learnings, but I think I'll leave it there. Because I already did the shebang on the strategy, I'm not going to talk to that much either, other than to say we want to decarbonise everyone. Environmental, social and governance performance is hugely important to Contact. And while it looks like reporting fandangle and strategy up here, it's actually resulting in real outcomes on the shop floor, on the ground floor, for our waterways, for our environment. And that's the other, I guess, thing that I've tested myself on in my time working in sustainability within a big company. And I'm going to ask this to you because it's a challenging question. Does it matter that your why is different to someone else's if the outcome is the same? Because my why, I do this, is not necessarily the same as other people's why in my organisation. But it helps to contribute to the outcome. And that can be challenging for some of us, and it has been challenging for me in the past. And I guess that's my final thought I want to leave you with. Thank you.
Now, I'd love some questions for Kaapua. Fantastic, I knew there would be a few.
You said you had about 560,000 customers. You've just got another one because that was superb. Because I would vote for you for sure. I want to know, do you know, and I don't know much about electricity, are the prices in the south the same as the north?
No, so prices vary by region.
Okay.
And a lot of that is, so I love my little space over here. Pricing is very complicated because it's made up of lines, charges and other things, but that's different over every region.
And how do you compare to other companies with that, do you know?
It depends again on the region and your level of usage and the type of plan you're on. So I always, and I probably get it growing for doing it, I always tell people to go to those tools online to actually compare, because across regions it's all different. Yeah.
But not if you're doing that, because that's amazing.
Yeah.
Can't do this one in the other back.
Kia ora, and thanks for your talk tonight. It was very informative. I'm just curious around the 49% on the agricultural aspect around the carbon emissions, and obviously we just sort of brushed over that, but I'm curious to know I see a really strong place for Contact to form some partnerships with the agricultural industry, and I think that there could be some really powerful things coming from that, and bridging understanding there. And I was just wondering, would you like to come to our farm and hear our story and our why around our environmental sustainability and where we want to head to and what we're doing? Because I think if there's more a united team front instead of all the sectors working individually, if we all work collaboratively, we could really make some powerful change. And I can see that Contact working with the industry could be an example of the power that could come from industry. Be an example of the power that could come from that.
I would love to, because I think collaboration drives innovation. You know, bringing different sectors together is how you come up with some of the most amazing solutions. So I think that would be great. Yeah, awesome.
Should like them all better. Yeah.
Thank you. I too enjoyed that speech. I just can't get my head around this whole solar panel thing, and I presume that the demand for energy is just going to continue increasing over time. It's going to be more and more difficult to put in power plants like hydroelectric or whatever. And I just can't get my head around why the big power companies don't consider subsidising or paying for solar panels for people to put on their roofs and charging a lease or a rent or, you know, something like that, to lower the overall demand on
the grid. Yeah. And you know, and this is the honest truth, businesses are very short term in their focus. And so in the short term, when they reviewed solar last, as far as I can recall, it wasn't economic for our customers to have solar. However, that doesn't mean that's always going to be the case. In terms of electricity storage and sort of solar in particular, I think the battery technology is what needs to catch up in order to be able to store the electricity, which would be helpful to reducing that load on the grid and the requirement for thermal. But there's other ways the sector are looking at things like that, and there's other ways the government are looking at things like that. So government and energy companies are not necessarily on the same page in terms of what they think solutions might look like, but you are correct in that I also think it's be very difficult to consent new hydro developments and other such impactful energy developments in the future. There is a lot going on in the wind space. I mean, I mentioned we're building a geothermal power station in Taupō. There's work looking at hydrogen. There are solar farms that have been announced, but you're right, they're being built by the smaller generating companies rather than big companies. But it is a dynamic sector at the moment, because you're also right in that demand is going to go up. And so we will need new generation to be able to meet that demand.
I'll be really quick. I'm just curious, when you're talking about the EV market and the transport, which is a huge thing, and they're really pushing for those EV cars, where do you see the power supply coming for those?
So,
and the stations and how it'll work? Yeah.
So there's a lot of work that goes into that as well. And EVs are challenging because of the charging infrastructure. So the chargers come from sort of private companies like ChargeNet, and the electricity would come from different electricity retailers is the current way that they've structured them. I know there's some work going on, I think it's by a group called Drive Electric, which is about building a charging infrastructure highway right up and down the South Island. You're starting to see more chargers pop up around the country, but it is challenging because there's a couple of challenges with EV uptake. One is cost. They're hugely expensive as vehicles. The other is drive time and charge time. Requires a change of behaviour. So we have EVs at Contact, and we've set a target to be 100% electric. 100% of our passenger fleet to be electric within the near future, and as soon as we can, be 100% electric across the entire fleet. But we are in a position where we can afford those vehicles, we can build the charging infrastructure on our own sites, but there are some challenges that we've got to address as a nation if we want large-scale uptake of EVs.
What's the demand on the power?
Yes, and demand on the power supply, yeah.
The infrastructure's not there, is it? The links and the...
No, not quite yet.
Just listening to the stories that you're telling, I mean, I've not really heard anything about how the amazing stuff you guys are doing. Farmers are also doing some pretty amazing stuff, but how do you suggest we go about showcasing it to the country? Because, I mean, it's a pretty amazing story you're telling, but what recommendations do you have for us?
I find it really hard because there's a fine line between being proud of what you've done and recognising the larger impacts of your business. And often when we do put up our hands and we go, we think we did something pretty cool over here, we also get the slap back down going, you're still hugely impactful, which is true. It is true. So it's been a constant challenge for us to manage that. The other thing is our desire, and this is a cultural thing within our organisation, to be aspirational versus being practical and having runs on the board. So we're now, I think just now, 6 years into it, at the point where we've got enough runs on the board where we probably could tell a big story, but internally we haven't quite recognised that or caught up with that or invested in that, because telling the story requires sort of resource to do that, and storytellers, which we're not there yet, but I really hope that we'll get there.
I have a question. I've got the remote. So at some point in your organisation, you've been the thorn in someone's side. You've been telling them things they don't want to hear, and I wonder how you went around that, and also sustainably, because you're still there. So I'm a believer in we need to hear the things that we don't always want to hear.
Yeah. So I'll just give you some background. I have a big story on that particular question. So I'm the head of sustainability and I sit on the operations leadership team, which is made up of the heads of all our power stations. They're all men. I'm the only woman, the only young person. I'm not the only person of colour, but I am the only Māori in that group. My boss is a woman and she's bloody phenomenal and grew up here in Southland, and she's very empowering. But when I first became the head of sustainability, she put me on a course, a leadership course to develop, I don't know, my leadership skills as a new sort of manager at that level. And I went on this course and thought it was like a hippie waste of time. But at the end of the course, I had broken down into tears. I had recognised that the insecurities I had about myself as a woman, as a Māori, as a young person, prevented me from really engaging in my colleagues. But the moment that I was able to address those insecurities, the way I influenced changed and became a bit stronger. And that's because my influencing style became about relationships, forming those positive relationships and having a collective skin in the game approach. This is our challenge, bro. I know you're not here to, just be a pain in the ass, but to actually, you've got your agenda, I've got mine, how do we work together? And actually by building those positive relationships rather than treating my colleagues like whore-has who are getting in the way, actually made a huge difference. But the other thing is about storing your gunpowder for the big fights. And often what I do, and I mentioned it, you've got all these stakeholders across your business, all these different business units. I go try one way, if it doesn't work, I go try a different group and see if they're interested. Sometimes it happens, like in a big organisation, we've got about 1,000 staff. I have an idea 2 years ago, get nowhere with it, drop it, leave it alone. 2 years later, someone else from another team comes up with the same idea and it's fabulous. And you get in behind them, because now's the time that wasn't there 2 years ago. So it is having that long-term view of how you influence change and actually being open and recognising you're not going to win all the battles. But keep chipping away, yeah.
just a quick question. So, tēnā koe, thank you for your presentation tonight. I guess my question is a bit related actually. So at the start you talked about your parents and your connection back to your marae, and I wonder how much of your upbringing and your, the space you grew up in and the place you grew up in has influenced you, and what's your strength, I suppose, that you bring from that, and what's the, I guess, personal challenge that presents to you from time to time?
Yeah, that's a very good question. It's like we're building our power station right in Taupō. It's called the Tauhara Geothermal Power Station, and it sits below a mountain. That mountain is not just a mountain, it's an ancestral maunga, and my cultural values tell me that that's really important. That's not just a natural piece of land, that's an ancestor that has a story and an importance beyond how our consenting framework may view it, or how a company might view it. And so the challenge for me is often to reconcile those different cultural viewpoints. And I work quite a lot in that space between our tangata whenua partners and relationships and contact. And I don't even attempt to solve it. But what I do try to create is a sort of listening, learning, respectful space where we can have those conversations together. For my own self as well, just preserving myself. Like I said, I've got amazing colleagues who look after me, and sometimes they need to step forward and I have to step back. And I guess that's the nature of being in a really awesome team, which allows you to be you while still delivering on those environmental, social, cultural things that you care about.
Thank you. You mentioned that your company, beautiful represented, interested in producing hydrogen from water, and my question is in two parts. Like, first of all, I'm not sure if we still need water, the clear water. So if we would use water for hydrogen, if it's a good idea. So there is the technology plasma, which is for solid waste, producing energy from solid waste, and the sub-product from this technology is hydrogen. Maybe your company would be interested in this technology better?
Yeah, I think we're interested in all kinds of technology. We've also got someone interested in algae energy generation, so growing algae in one of our old power stations just to see what kind of electricity sort of generating power it has. So we're open to all kinds of things. But just to touch on your point as well around hydrogen and water, I agree with you. And a lot of these energy sources, regardless of where they come from, still rely on natural resources. So it's still the underlying same natural input. It's about assessing what is the most sustainable, enduring, and hopefully one day regenerating process to develop the electricity needs that we need for our communities.
Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. I could just tell by the amount of questions how engaged you all were, and all of those key take-homes that Kaapua shared with us there. And for me, it's hugely around that all of us in the decarbonisation together, it is not here to be a box-ticking exercise. It's an ever-evolving expectation of our stakeholders on us all collectively across industries to do our bit. So thank you so much for that. Now we're actually going to take a very short break, so you can head along to the toilet and recharge your glasses, and we'll come back in about 10 minutes to hear our last guest there.